Excerpt from the 730th Contact Report from the 6th of January, 2020. Translation, Vibke Walder. Corrections, Vivian Legge and Christian Freihner. Where the coronavirus can run riot all over the body. Conversation between Billy and Ptaah.
It would probably be even more important now that you say and explain something more precise about the coronavirus. In which case then you should please explain it in a form that is understandable even for laypersons. Unfortunately, such technical terms are something like double Dutch for us medically uneducated persons.
Interesting, but concerning your request for an explanation in relation to the coronavirus, which we have been researching since February last year since its first phases and about which we have gained certain cognitions, I will make an effort to explain some things without using technical terms. Thereby I can briefly explain again what I already explained to you privately and therefore not publicly, on November 30th, namely that the rampantly spreading corona disease is a lung infection which, however, in infected persons, under some circumstances, is at first only recognizable in the background and is hardly or not at all medically recognizable. Consequently only after some time does a truly recognizable illness appear, that is to say, an actual lung disease that can be detected. Nevertheless, the lungs are the fundamental attack factor of the coronavirus, therefore we have to speak of a lung infection, as you had already predicted in 1995. Therefore the pathogen of the rampantly spreading corona disease, as a highly aggressive virus, attacks the lungs with infection and indeed, on the one hand and under some circumstances, only very weakly and therefore hardly or not at all detectably. Consequently the terrestrial medical practitioners can hardly or not at all detect a lung infection, or only in the case of an effectively stronger infection. On the one hand, this is because they have no knowledge of any kind regarding this due to their still insufficient medical cognizance and, on the other hand, they do not have the necessary instruments to detect it. However, if an effective lung disease occurs, caused by a coronaviral inflammation, then it brings forth complications, in fact mainly by the various vessels becoming inflamed and by the respiratory tract being attacked, which overall is extremely difficult to treat, actually often with no chance of recovery, because the lungs are no longer supplied with blood, namely due to the inflamed vessels which prevent the blood transport and thus the oxygen supply. On the one hand, the coronavirus attacks the primary endogenous immune system, in which case, however, the lungs are fundamentally used as the impulse-based host medium. This means, however, that due to the impulse-only process, this can hardly be detected or cannot be detected with today's terrestrial medical cognizance. Rather, on the other hand, it can be detected only when an effective infection of the lungs occurs. This is a fact that is still completely unknown to the entire field of terrestrial medical science. From the host medium, that is to say, from the lungs, the virus encroaches on the vessels of all organs and begins its actual work of destruction in the form that it calls forth disturbances in the micro-region of the organ's circulation, in fact, independent of the inflammation of the lungs. Consequently, life-threatening damage is caused, whereby, for example, infarcts of the vessels occur in the intestine and brain, as well as heart trouble, heart failure and pulmonary embolisms and so forth, which can ultimately lead to death. The secondary immune system also plays an important role in the whole process, which, however, is not decisively considered by terrestrial medical science in a kind or form, and consequently it is not as effective in an illness, as would be necessary. If the comprehensive circumstance of the coronavirus is to be explained, then it basically corresponds to a partly mutating germ and, in different forms, to a germ that is becoming more dangerous, which indeed attacks the lungs, non-demonstrably in an impulse form or even demonstrably, however, usually uses them imperceptibly only as a transitional host in order to then attack the vessels of other organs in a life-threatening inflammatory form, which then often leads to death. A particularly critical aspect of the coronavirus is the fact that it mutatingly calls forth changes in all vessels. However, it also attacks the protective cell layer of the inner surfaces of the various organs too and has a destructive effect on them. In that case, a dying of the organs as well as the tissues results. Consequently, these, like the blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, become inoperative and thus inevitably cell death is caused. Therefore, in the last phase it is not a lung disease as such, rather a disease affecting the entire organ system, that is to say, a life-threatening inflammation of all or many of the vessels of the organs. In this respect, only individual organs can be affected first, but then all organs can be affected very quickly, which means that in one case, individual or several organs can fail, and in a serious case, even all of them can fail practically simultaneously. Therefore, for example, in a human being, an acute intestinal failure and a lung failure can already lead to death, or a failure of the kidneys, liver, spleen, the brain or the stomach, but also a failure of the pancreas. Cardiovascular problems are also to be mentioned, which lead to sudden heart failure, just as various organs can fail simultaneously. This also means that different human beings can have different causes of death and therefore there is no uniformity. Also, the blood vessels, arteries and veins and even the skin are extremely susceptible to the coronavirus, as are the cornea of the eyes as well as the ossicles and the taste buds, because the virus can directly attack and infect all the mentioned organs, and damage them through inflammation right up to organ failure. Consequently, the function of the vessels is destroyed and all of it leads to death.
Highly educated earthling doctors and so forth, in their narrow-mindedness and their delusion of being all-knowing, will not accept this and will probably revilingly call it all nonsense, which is why it might be better if I do not recall everything you have just explained and do not write it down.
It will probably be as you say,